What I saw when I returned home after working overtime was my husband holding down our daughter and forcing her to drink something, while his mother watched silently. I saw my daughter lying unconscious and limp beside them, and I lost control of myself, jumped on them. My name is Liliana. I'm a 30-year-old housewife who works as a teacher at a high school. I married Adrian, who is 2 years older than me and whom I met through a circle activity during my university days. We celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary, and 3 years ago, we had our daughter, Lily. My parents' house is near our home. With my mother's help right after childbirth and my husband's concern for me, I was able to face my daughter with ease during my childcare leave. Then, 2 years ago, when we found a nursery school that could take care of our daughter, my mother-in-law, who was living with my brother-in-law and his wife in another state, offered to live with us. I knew that my mother-in-law wasn't getting along well with her strong-willed daughter-in-law, so I gladly accepted the offer. Until then, my relationship with my mother-in-law had not been bad, and I thought it would be reassuring to have her help as a senior in child-rearing. My mother-in-law is a sociable person, and she quickly became friends with the neighbors. The day after she moved in, I saw her having fun, and I thought it was good to accept her living with us. About a month after we started living together, my mother-in-law suggested that we withdraw our daughter from the nursery school because she would take care of her at home. My husband agreed with his mother's opinion. Although I had entrusted most of the nursery school pickups and drop-offs to my mother-in-law, I was honestly uncomfortable when I heard that it was too much trouble. We finally found a nursery school. "Why don't we keep her there?" I said. My husband replied,
"What are you talking about? It costs money to send her to a nursery school, and it's a waste to not have my mother take care of her at home."
My mother-in-law added,
"That's right. Raising children costs money. You have to save money by cutting unnecessary expenses."
My husband continued,
"Yeah, that's right. My mother raised us brothers splendidly. Isn't it more reassuring than leaving it to young nursery school teachers?"
Our daughter was forced to withdraw from the nursery school by the two of them, and I was pushed aside. After that, my mother-in-law started taking my daughter out frequently to her hobby circle and other places. Around this time, my daughter started crying at night and getting sick more often. I wasn't too worried about it because the same thing could happen even if she went to nursery school, but the problem was my mother-in-law. She refused to approach my daughter when she was feeling unwell because she didn't want to catch the illness, and in the end, I had to take time off work or leave my daughter with a local childcare supporter. Sometimes I wondered if there was any point in choosing home childcare. Fortunately, with the understanding and support of my colleagues at work, I was able to get help even if I had to take sudden time off, and I was able to overcome it with my mother's help. But I couldn't just rely on my colleagues, and my mother was also working, so I felt bad about relying on them too much. When my daughter was feeling unwell and crying, I was exhausted both physically and mentally, and I began to think that I had no choice but to give up my job. Then my husband's debt came to light. He had failed in an investment he had started to earn pocket money. I couldn't quit my job, so if I couldn't rely on my mother-in-law anymore, I had no choice but to look for a nursery school where my daughter could go back to. However, my mother-in-law was living with us, and it became difficult to pass the nursery school entrance examination. When I was at a loss, my mother-in-law told me that her son's debt was because of her and asked me to leave my daughter to her. As she said, my mother-in-law became actively involved in raising my daughter, and when she got sick again, she took care of her, so I was able to continue working. When my daughter took the medicine prescribed by the hospital, she slept better and cried less than before. Sometimes I talked with my husband that our daughter had gotten a lot better. However, my daughter's night crying became even worse. My mother-in-law scolded her, saying,
"I've never heard of a child crying so much at night."
And my husband continued to take out his frustration on me. Even after I returned to work, I tried to go home as early as possible and take care of my daughter. But this year, I became a homeroom teacher for high school students, which made it difficult. My husband also became busy due to a department transfer, and the burden on my mother-in-law increased. My family was still sleep-deprived because my daughter's night crying didn't improve at all. My mother-in-law, who had been using sleeping pills regularly, decided to get a stronger prescription, which made me feel sorry for her. But when my husband and mother-in-law started taking sleeping pills together, their sleep deprivation seemed to be relieved. I couldn't take medicine to sleep, so I continued to have difficult days, but I decided that there was no other way to spend time with my daughter. My husband and his mother were able to sleep better when they were frustrated with my daughter's night crying, and my daughter became more calm when she was with me. For now, I was relieved. Around autumn, there were a series of school events and I had to follow up with students who were worried about their future studies. I couldn't take time off, and my daughter's night crying worsened again. I had to apologize to my husband and mother-in-law and beg them to stop taking sleeping pills. They reluctantly accepted my request, but my daughter started to become drowsy and lethargic during the day. I noticed this change in my daughter's behavior and decided to talk to my husband about it. You know, Lily seems a little strange, my husband replied.
Really? I don't really care.
She's not paying attention when I call her name, and it's worrying me. Maybe we should have her checked at the hospital.
What? That's an exaggeration. Maybe she's sleeping more during the day because her night crying has subsided.
I still think I should take her to the hospital tomorrow.
Okay. I'm off tomorrow, so I'll take Lily to the hospital with my mother. You have to prepare for your final exams, right? You don't need to take the day off.
Is that okay? Thank you. Although I was a little worried about my daughter's behavior, I decided to go to work the next day since he would be accompanying her. That day, I had to deal with my students' parents and came home late. I sent my husband a message during the day, but I only received a reply that said everything was fine, and I was worried about my daughter. When I got out of the car, I heard my daughter crying. Was she crying because she couldn't sleep tonight? I hurried home. When I entered the house, the bedroom door was open, and I could hear my daughter crying and my husband shouting. You don't have to shout even if you're frustrated, I thought as I entered the bedroom. What I saw was my husband holding down my daughter and forcing her to drink something. My mother-in-law was just looking at my daughter next to him, looking annoyed. I saw my daughter flailing her arms and legs violently under my husband's body and let out a silent scream. The next moment, I punched my husband in the face and slapped my mother-in-law's cheek.
What are you doing?
After both of them held their cheeks for a moment, they started to criticize me for holding my daughter.
What are you doing?
What kind of person are you? You hit us out of nowhere.
Shut up. You're a father who holds down a 3-year-old child, and you're a grandmother who just watches it happen. You both deserve it. My husband and mother-in-law were silenced by my unusual behavior. My daughter, who I thought had stopped crying, took shallow breaths and went limp in my arms. What did you give Lily to drink?
Medicine.
What kind of medicine?
It's just medicine. Right, Mom?
Yes. It's what we got from the hospital.
I held my daughter and looked for the medication instructions. There was no medicine prescribed today. There shouldn't be any over-the-counter medicine that my daughter can drink, let alone any leftover medicine from before. While I was doing that, my daughter lost consciousness and started foaming at the mouth. I called an ambulance on my smartphone while giving first aid to my daughter, but she never regained consciousness. It felt like a very long time from when I held my daughter to when we arrived at the hospital by ambulance. When I saw my daughter being taken to the treatment room at the hospital, it seemed that my husband and mother-in-law had arrived late. They approached me looking annoyed, but didn't seem to be in a hurry. They were holding their cheeks, which were purple and swollen, with a handkerchief. Maybe it was just my feelings, but it seemed like they were annoyed that my daughter had become like this. I confirmed that my husband was standing next to me and asked again what he had given my daughter to drink.
Sleeping pills?
He said, glaring at me as if it were nothing. Sleeping pills. Is it normal to prescribe sleeping pills to children? I was surprised and exclaimed because I had heard that using sleeping pills on young children is done under the supervision of doctors or nurses.
No. It's medicine prescribed to Mom.
My husband replied. What? Did you give her adult medicine?
It was a hassle to crush it and dissolve it in water to make it easier to drink.
He said.
But it helped her sleep well. It seemed like you were busy with work, so I thought I'd help you out.
Is this the first time you've given her sleeping pills?
When she was sick with a cold before, she slept well after taking medicine from the hospital. I remembered that and started giving her sleeping pills to help her sleep.
What are you guys thinking, giving such things to a child?
It can't be helped. I'll get sick if I don't sleep at night.
My husband said.
I have a constitution that requires me to take sleeping pills, but I couldn't do that because of that child.
My mother-in-law said. Are these people really the same human beings in front of me? Giving adult medicine, let alone crushing tablets, to put a young child to sleep is far beyond my common sense, and I couldn't even speak.
The reason why Lily's night crying doesn't stop is because you don't discipline her, right?
That's right. You're always spoiling her, so she's so selfish.
Even though you can't thank me and my mother enough, you do something like this. Jeez, I can't stand it anymore.
The husband strokes his cheek again. That's my line.
Huh?
When the husband tried to grab me, a young man in a white coat appeared from behind and glanced at us with a stern face.
This is a hospital. Please refrain from speaking loudly.
Sorry. This rubbish is.
Not rubbish, she is.
But, if she had just kept quiet without arguing, my son wouldn't have raised his voice so much, would he?
The male doctor sighed heavily at the words of the husband and mother-in-law and continued with a stern expression.
No, it was a story that made me want to argue even though I'm a doctor. Is it true that you gave your child sleeping pills?
What's wrong with that?
What's wrong? It's not nothing. I can't just stay silent when I hear that you gave adult medicine to a young child.
The husband and mother-in-law were a little taken aback by the doctor's angry tone, but they soon had a look of dissatisfaction on their faces.
We were suffering from the child's night crying. You can't understand how we feel since you're not the one involved.
Certainly, there are many people who are struggling with a child who cries at night. However, giving your daughter sleeping pills is not a reason to put her in danger.
What are you talking about? It's medicine prescribed by the hospital, isn't it? It's safe.
No. Sleeping pills prescribed for adults are dangerous for children. You don't have that kind of knowledge, do you?
Well, the doctor who prescribed it and the pharmacist didn't say anything about it.
It is a well-known fact that you should not transfer medicines prescribed to others. We prescribe medication after assessing the patient's condition. If you give a person the wrong medication, it can be life-threatening.
I wouldn't know that unless you explained it to me.
That's right. If you're going to be so noisy, you should explain it.
Then it's the hospital's fault if something happens to my daughter.
Stop it already. Don't just make excuses all the time, both of you. A low voice escaped my mouth at the attitude of them who did not show a repentant attitude. Lily's situation is undoubtedly your responsibility.
We didn't know, did we?
It's not that you didn't know. You just didn't try to find out. If you think about it a little, you can understand that you shouldn't do such a thing without being explained.
I can't imagine a daughter-in-law talking back to her husband in my day.
Huh? If the wife can't correct the mistake of the husband who put my child in danger, I'll quit as a wife.
Well, today's daughter-in-law is just like this.
Certainly, I have worked, so it is true that I have caused trouble for my mother-in-law.
That's right. You know how much we've suffered from night crying.
But wasn't it my daughter who was suffering? Without thinking about the cause of night crying, you took her around and didn't even look at her when she got sick.
But old people like me can't afford to catch a cold.
I see. So you forgot that children are not just cute. I'm fed up.
Hey!
You too. My husband and daughter's father who don't even try to think about anything other than themselves are not necessary for us. What you did to your daughter was assault. Be prepared to take appropriate action by filing a complaint. Then, the doctor contacted the police and the child welfare center, and the husband and mother-in-law were arrested and detained. My daughter had been using a large amount of sleeping pills, but fortunately she was able to survive. I divorced my husband and received my home as compensation, but sold it and moved. The former husband was charged with assault against his daughter. Since I did not agree to a settlement, he was sentenced to prison as it was. Now, my daughter has completely stopped crying at night and has no after effects of sleeping pills, and is living with the help of my parents. I am just happy to see my daughter's healthy appearance. How was this story? Please subscribe to the channel as well. Let's meet again in the next video.